Good to see everyone. And Ms. Lynn, I'll ask you, assume we do have a quorum, correct?
We do.
So we will, at this time, call our meeting to order. And our first item of business will be the approval of our minutes from our May 14th, 2015 meeting. Everyone should have been sent a copy of those.
Move the minutes be approved as presented.
We have a motion, second.
Second.
All in favor say aye. Opposed, like sign. Good. Thank you very much. Okay, there were several items that we talked about last time that we wanted to identify and receive some background information on those. One of those was regarding our resources, resource list, or our vehicle inventory. And I believe Kevin pulled that information together and sent it to everyone. So at this time, if there was anything in that information that you had questions or concerns about, we'll open the floor up to discussion and do that at this time. I will say that if there's by any chance that you failed to see the information or didn't get the information or would like to have the information, let us know. We'll try to scrape up a copy so you can look through it tonight, raise a question if you have one. Okay, hearing no concerns about that item of interest, we will move to our next item on the agenda, which is an update and addressing questions regarding the taxable values by fire district. And Jeff Yates is here. He can respond to any questions you may have, and he also provided us with a handout with some information. So we've got that a little uneven. Yeah. I apologize for my hoarseness. I wasn't at a softball game this weekend. I was on a lawnmower all day today, breathing dust, so about got the best of it.
The third page is different than the one we sent out. All right, it didn't include the third page when I sent it out.
There is a third page. Jeff was sharing that information with me. I believe the issue or question came up last time about the fact that if we pull the capital expenses out, it would be significant impact on the tax rates by district. And so Jeff put that information together to show how that would come down without the capital.
Can you say that again, what you just said about the capital? Which one doesn't have capital in it? Which sheet?
The last sheet.
Let me explain.
Sure, Jeff, dive in.
The last sheet, is what the 2015, or the 2016 budgets, which are frozen without capital, what their tax impact would be for the 11 now fire fee districts. We obviously know what the tax impacts are for tax districts. The only thing this doesn't take into consideration is the sales tax. There's no way to calculate that at this point, but it'd be minimal impact across these units. So if you were to take their 2016 budget and convert that and use a tax, that's what this table, the last page, on page number 3, that's what this represents, which means it's stripped of capital, essentially. Does that make sense to everybody? And when we say penny value, that's essentially what a penny of tax rate generates in that district. So the way to figure out what the tax impact is, you take the total budget of VFD and divide it by the penny value, and that tells you how many pennies it would take to fund that district. So I wasn't sure if everybody knew what penny value means. We talk about it all the time in our meetings, but okay.
Questions or concerns at this point? And so you can't bring it up later, just asking for. Okay, at this point, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understood, as we discussed last time, we wanted to try and hopefully educate everyone on the committee with sort of the background of fire service and funding, and in an effort to move forward and build consensus around how to provide that funding. I know that we talked, and Chief Getty brought up the point that it may be important to talk about staffing levels, service levels, contracts, in order to, in other words, he said, you show us what you want us to do, and that we'll tell you what it costs, I believe was to paraphrase it. So that is, we're attempting to move in that direction. At this time, I'm gonna turn it over to Curtis T. and Kevin to discuss some of those service levels. And I will also let you know that I have some information just to point you in the direction we're sort of heading in. We visited with Jeff Crook, and Jeff is in the process of trying to put together sort of a baseline contract or a general contract to give us a starting point, and use that as a mechanism for moving forward. And Jeff has put together sort of a legal primer with a lot of questions, sort of a frequently asked questions with regard to the legalities of the fire service, and I have that, but I won't give it to you now. We'll wait, and I'll share it with you after Curtis's presentation and questions. That way we won't get the two mixed up together. So, Curtis, you're on.
All right. What we're going to talk about, and this is not all inclusive, but it will give you a fairly good overview of a couple of different things. One is the NFPA standards on staffing, recommendations for response. And we're going to touch on a standard called 1710, which affects career departments, and then we're going to compare it to 1720, which affects volunteer and combination departments. And then we will finish it out with a discussion on ISO, or insurance rates, as they are conducted by the state of North Carolina. So, try this again. That doesn't work, we'll try this. Everything that we're doing is based on keeping the volunteer fire service in Union County viable, to make sure that we serve the citizens. We're going to start off and we're going to talk a little bit about service delivery models. I know that you've heard a little bit about the fire study as well as the Horizon study. If not, I'm sure you will. In both those documents, NFPA 1720 was discussed, which is the standard for organization of fire department services by volunteer and combination departments. Both of those two studies recommended following 1720, so that's the reason why we are talking about it in this presentation. What's the difference between a career fire department and a volunteer fire department? There is a little bit of difference in the way the two standards are structured. This is NFPA 1710. This is what the city of Monroe is would be judged against as far as the recommended standard. And whenever we look down through here, if you look in the middle of the screen, it talks about 15 firefighters arriving at a fire within 9 minutes of notification 90% of the time. That is a very critical number, and it is established by how many people it takes to conduct all the activity that you would have within the first 9 minutes of a working fire. So just to give you an idea, they're looking at 15 firefighters within 9 minutes, and that is for the baseline firefighting by a career fire department. It calls for 4 firefighters to arrive to a fire incident within 5 minutes of notification 90% of the time. Again, this is what the fully career departments are judged on. Sometimes you'll hear people say, both in the career and you can also hear in volunteer and combination departments, that they have to have 4 firefighters on a piece of fire apparatus as minimum staffing. Actually, NFPA 1710 allows you to have 4 people arrive on scene to be able to establish a team. So they don't all have to respond on one piece of apparatus, they can arrive. The most important thing that you have to remember is staffing is a local decision. Whenever we're talking about NFPA 1710, or we're talking about NFPA 1720, they are recommended standards. They are not law unless the local jurisdiction decides to adopt 1710 through resolution or ordinance. So they're recommendations. They are fact-based recommendations, however. 1720, like we said, is the standard that we'll be dealing with concerning personnel deployment and response times to fire and rescue emergencies, designed primarily with communities with volunteer firefighters. What's the biggest difference between 1710 and 1720? Basically, I just stated it. If you have a combination department, usually the volunteer firefighters are supplementing a small staff of paid firefighters, and in an all-volunteer department, then the department is totally volunteer. So you can't expect the same level of service as you would with 1710. So, as I said, it's a little different standard. We have to talk about response time. From the time that somebody calls in an emergency until the first unit arrives on scene, that is your response time. And you have to include in this, in the bigger picture, you have to include the time that it takes to process the call through the 911 center, the time that the call is put out, the amount of time that it takes the fire department, once they receive the call, to actually respond and to arrive on scene. But you also have to remember, you have to get enough people on scene to be effective. we're going to talk about some of the things that makes that critically important as we go on. And forgive me as we go through here, I'm not going to read everything on the PowerPoint because I'm not going to insult anybody's intelligence to that point. So I'm going to hit the high spots, and what we will do is we will email out to you a copy of the PowerPoint for you to read in its entirety. One thing that is also critical is something called sustained firefighting operations. Fire department has to be able to sustain whatever operation that they are dealing with. They have to be able to conduct fire ground activities, fire suppression, search and rescue, forcible entry, ventilation, preservation of property or salvage, accountability of personnel, and being able to have an active rapid intervention crew available on scene whenever crews are inside fighting fire. In case something goes wrong, there needs to be people outside dedicated to go in and get them. And the thing that you have to keep in mind whenever we look at things like this, that takes a lot of resources. Whenever you dispatch a call and it's a structure fire and you have multiple departments respond, that total number of people that you're talking about arriving on scene do not all have to come from one department. They can come from a couple of departments, but you have to have enough people in that geographic area to be able to get people there in a timely manner to make sure that the best outcome possible can occur. A few months ago, well, let me back up. A few years ago, the Fire Commission actually went through and they designated the different fire departments by criteria that I'll show you in just a minute, either as a rural, a suburban, or an urban area. And in doing so, whenever you look at NFPA 1720, there are objectives that are recommended that you meet. If you look over in the far right-hand column, you'll see that for the rural areas, the expectation or the objective is that they are able to assemble 6 firefighters within 14 minutes of the call. Okay? If you go on down and you look at the suburban number, if you look at Mineral Springs down at number 15, go across to the right-hand side. In a suburban district, you're looking at 10 firefighters being on scene within 10 minutes of the call being initiated. And if you drop on down to number 20, you look at Stallings, go across, they are in an urban area, and their objective is 15 firefighters within 9 minutes, which is the same as the NFPA 1710 standard, because it's an urban standard. We went through, Chief Gaddy went through and confirmed this, and we also used one other type of criteria that I'll show you in just a minute to come up with the density. If you look, that's next to the last column on the right-hand side. Come up with the density designation for each fire district. Now, there's formula and numbers that you run through to come up with that calculation. And this particular chart, if you notice, you see New Salem up there 4 times. The goal behind this chart, this came out of another document that we had worked on, is to be able, down the road, to be able to look at New Salem's Station 4, Station 5, Station 6, Station 7, and be able to drill down a little further and look at each individual fire station territory to be able to keep up with how effective are we in responding, are we getting the numbers, are we hitting the times, do we need to do something different in that area. So whenever we get to that point, we will have much more detailed data to draw from and to try to make recommendations and conclusions later down the road. If you notice, there's square mileage there in the 4th column over, and then population also is one of the criteria that is used to determine what type of density that department actually is subject to. Any questions about this screen right here? I know it's kind of busy, And it's also kind of small depending on where you're sitting in the room. So it may be a little bit hard to see.
When was that put together? What year?
This was actually put together around December. Isn't that right, John?
Yeah.
Okay. Around December. Now, the population numbers are from census numbers, and they were the most up to date at that time. This is one of the explanations for where the description, the demand zone, urban, suburban, and rural come from. As far as demographics, it's about 1,000 people per square mile. And then, of course, out beside it, you see the minimum response, 15 people within 9 minutes at the 90th percentile. Whenever you get into NFPA 1710 and 1720, and actually most of the benchmarking, it's all based on percentile instead of percentage. So it's much more detailed in the way that the numbers are looked at to evaluate data. Suburban areas, 500 to 1,000 people, square mile. 10 people minimum staff, 10-minute response time at the 80th percentile. And then rural areas, less than 500 people per square mile, 5 people to respond within 14 minutes, again, at the 80th percentile. If you notice down under C, response time begins upon completion of the dispatch notification and ends at the time interval shown in the table. So in other words, what happens is whenever the call is dispatched, once that notification goes out, that time starts, and whatever is on scene within the given time, the 9 minutes, the 10 minutes, or the 14 minutes, that is your response. Okay.
Curtis, I know we had some concern last time about acronyms and one thing or another. Can you explain B there? Can you elaborate on AHJ?
Yes, I can.
Automatic aid?
I can. I actually will have an entire section on automatic aid,
Okay.
the ISO section.
Okay.
But basically, that is another fire department that is assisting you that is on the initial dispatch. It's not like the fire department arrives and says, oh, we need help. It is already pre-planned, and it's in the dispatch for that fire department. Like I said, we'll go into a lot more detail in the ISO section on that. AHJ is the authority having jurisdiction. So in this particular case, that means whatever fire department whose district it is, that geographic jurisdiction is the minimum staffing. Now, what that really means for us, I will go ahead and try to explain this because I was going to go back to B for this one. Whenever I said that a lot of the times the response involves more than one department, this is a pretty good explanation at this point as to how this works. Within, take the suburban area, 10 people to arrive on scene within 10 minutes. It may be that the department where the fire occurs, that jurisdiction has 5 people to respond within 10 minutes. And whoever their assisting fire department is on automatic aid also brings 5 people, and they get there within 10 minutes. They've met that 10-minute time frame, and they've also met the 10-person minimum staffing. Does that make sense? You get to use the resources for all the calculations as long as it is on your automatic aid response. And like I said, we'll go into more detail about that in the next presentation on ISO. Also, if you notice, a jurisdiction may have more than one demand zone. Whenever this moves further, as far as looking at documentation and trying to evaluate data, if you look on this particular screen, New Salem Fire Department, I'll use them again. They have 4 stations, they have 4 dedicated response areas. What we could do if they had shifts in population, which I know New Salem may not be the best example for this, but let's say it is. Let's say that their station 5 had some type of an explosive growth within that area and their numbers shifted, then they may not any longer be in a rural area. They could be in a suburban area, which means that particular station would have a higher expectation under 1720 for the amount of people that arrive within the set amount of time. But the other stations would remain where they are. Does that make sense? So you're trying to judge it and make it equal to the actual risk within that territory. Okay? Any other questions on this slide?
Yeah, one quick question. The minimum staffing list slide shows 5, and the previous one showed 6. So just a little clarity there.
On the one before?
Yes.
I think you're right. I sure did. I'll take it over for just 1 second and we'll pull it. The way that we took the numbers or the definitions, if you look up here, everything is based on the Census Bureau's numbers per square mile. So that is the number that we use to come up with the calculations, and we pulled that through the county's information. And then we also used CPSE, which is the Center for Public Safety Excellence, which does a lot of benchmarking and accreditation of fire departments. And we took their terminology also. If you look here, theirs is based on a little different population calculation, which is based on the fire district. So we also use that. And in our recommendation on the first page, or the bigger chart that you saw, if we had a department that under one of the criteria came out as a suburban department, but then in the other criteria from CPSE, they came out to be an urban, we rated them as an urban. So in other words, no matter how they came out, we always rated them the higher level in that particular page. That was kind of our methodology. Okay? I've already talked about this, being able to assemble an effective firefighting force within the time frames listed. 2 in, 2 out. This is something else. You know, I talked about very quickly rapid intervention teams being the crew that is on scene to be able to rescue firefighters that go down within a structure. Actually, even before you have established the rapid intervention team, before firefighters are supposed to go into a structure, you're supposed to meet the 2 in, 2 out rule, unless there's an obvious rescue that is known. And in this case, basically it's very simple. If you put 2 people inside the structure off the bat to do fire suppression or to look for occupants or anything like that inside the structure, you have to have 2 people outside. And the people outside have to be fully trained and they have to be floated. So this is a baseline safety regulation that actually comes from the OSHA regulations. Okay? But it's accepted in the fire service. Another thing that we have to look at whenever you're talking about fire services is distribution and concentration. They're kind of 2 different things, and whenever you start looking at the amount of resources that are available within the county, it comes to play. Distribution is simply the number of resources placed throughout the county. So whenever you look at the county map, if you go to the fire marshal's page on the website, you see a map of the fire districts. You can open it up and you get a pretty good idea of where the different stations are around the county. And distribution is just that. It's where the stations are. Okay? And what kind of resources are within those particular stations. Now, we carry the resources a little further whenever you start looking at concentration, and that is the number of resources within a particular area. If you have a really high number of incidents, or you have a number of, if traffic slows down the response to get people to the scene, you may have to have more resources within a more confined area to be able to meet those standards that I talked about earlier, being able to get X amount of firefighters to whatever scene within X amount of minutes. You may have to put more resources within a certain area of the county to be able to get those numbers to work out, to be able to get people there in a time frame where they can actually be effective. So distribution and concentration are the two things that you look at. And basically use the effective response force as the guide on where stations need to be located, or in our case, more to the point where staffing needs to be allocated. Does that make sense? You kind of use all these things, putting them together to try to make sure that you have what you need to be effective. Reliability is simply a situation that is also calculated into these matrices where you want to make sure that you are not exceeding the capability of a fire department. In other words, if they get to the point that they have too many runs within a station and they do not, and it routinely happens, that's a situation where you may have to add additional staffing to staff another truck within the area to be able to meet the demand load. That's a whole lot of paraphrasing, but that is what it's talking about. To be able to meet the needs of the area and be ready for the next call. So, really whenever we start talking about this, we're looking at ensuring quality fire rescue protection to the citizens, performing a risk analysis of unique local demands, and planning appropriately. Nationwide, this is what you do whenever you start looking at provision of service. Allowing local leaders to make decisions about finite resources based on hard data. That is the name of the game. Any questions about the NFPA 1720 or NFPA 17 standards? And there may be a misprint on the 6 and the 5. I'm going to go back and look because I don't want to give you the wrong answer off the top of my head. Does that make sense? Or? I'm thinking that one group listed 5 and one group listed 6, but I want to make sure. So, but any questions about that? Like I said, it's been used from the Fire Commission, it's been used in the fire study, it's used in the Horizon study, but that's where it comes from. Fairly clear? Okay. We'll move on to the ISO rating. And basically where we are going to start is the 9S rating. Again, I will paraphrase so you don't have to try to read the entire slide. But basically, there are just a few things that are required for a 9S inspection in North Carolina to be successful. And basically, 9S is the minimum accepted rating for a fire department. You have to meet the 9S or you are not rated. So, and this is in the initial inspection of the fire department. They have to be incorporated under Chapter 55 General Statutes of North Carolina or be operated by a city, a county, or sanitary district as a governmental unit. If the fire department is incorporated, it has to operate with a contract through a city, contract through a county, or contract through a sanitary district, or a combination. And then the county commissioners have to establish and define an area of responsibility outside the given municipalities. Map and description of the insurance fire district has to be approved by the Office of State Fire Marshal, which is part of the Department of Insurance. Changes to the insurance district boundaries should be noted on an appropriate map and be approved by the Office of State Fire Marshal. Whenever number 3 right here occurs and they have to start looking at maps and they're doing an evaluation of a fire department, it can be a lengthy process because they have a waiting list for the inspection to be scheduled, and then they also have to review it in Raleigh after the inspector comes through, and then it takes an additional step. It has to go to ISO, which is a national organization that's based in New Jersey, and they have to review everything. Then it comes back. Just to kind of give you an idea of why it takes so long to try to make certain changes in fire districts. Personnel, it's pretty straightforward. For a fire department to be organized in North Carolina and meet at least an INS, they have to have 20 personnel. 18 people have to be designated as firefighters. At least 2 people have to be designated as traffic personnel. They can also be firefighters. Or they can show through documentation that the department averages 12 firefighters for each of the previous 20 structure fires. For most departments, it's easier to have the 20 people on the roster than it is to try to meet that 12 firefighters to each structure fire. Certified firefighters have to be 18 years of age. Junior firefighters do not count as part of the 20 people that you need for the department. Initial certification for a new fire district requires 20 personnel on the roster. If you're using the 20 personnel option to form your fire department and you want to open a substation, you have to have 8 additional people on the roster for each additional substation. Okay? So you have to have 20 for your main station, and then if you have a substation, you have to have 8 for each additional substation. And then you can also opt to try to maintain the average responding personnel of 12 for your main station and 4 for each additional station. Like I said, most departments do not follow that rationale. This one I am going to read because this is a situation that has gotten some departments around the state in trouble. Matter of fact, another county just had an inspection that an announcement was made this week that 3 of their departments were put on probation, part of which fell under this category. Each fire department shall assure the response of at least 4 members and 1 engine to all fires and fire alarms in structures. The chief may be one of the 4 responding members. Response of a fire department as primary first alarm department, or it's their district, to a fire alarm in a structure within its established insurance district with less than a minimum required engine or manpower shall be considered by OSFM as a non-response. So in other words, if the fire department that is responsible for that district does not respond to a fire alarm or a structure fire with at least 4 people and an engine, the state looks at it as a non-response, even if additional resources came from other departments, because they're viewing that primary department. Any department determined by OSFM to have 2 or more non-response records shall be placed by OSFM on probation for a period of 12 months. 2 responses, and that does occur in certain situations around the state. Fire department on probation shall submit quarterly reports to OSFM inspector, all fire and fire alarm structure response records for the next 12 consecutive calendar months that show there have been no additional non-responses within that 12-month period. If fire department fails to submit quarterly report, insurance district for the fire department shall be designated a Class 10 by the Office of State Fire Marshal. So in other words, once they're put on this probation, they have to submit the report, and if they come up with more than additional non-responses, they can go to a Class 10, or if they do not submit that report, they can go to a Class 10. And very quickly here, I'll try to explain. Class 10 is equal to you have no fire protection. So your insurance rates, if you're in a Class 10 area, are exorbitant compared to even the Class 9. Does that make sense? Maybe a little bit. Okay? Training. Each fire department has to be able to schedule over the year 48 hours of training and make it available to the members. Out of that 48 hours, each firefighter has to attend 36 hours of training within the calendar year, and they just changed this a little bit. That training now has to be some type of drill. It cannot be just business meetings. That's a transition in state law over the last couple of years. In addition to that, each fire chief has to complete a course called Chiefs 101, and they have to have the certificate for that particular class. If the fire chief does not have that certificate, the fire department can be placed on probation also. Okay. That certificate has to be renewed every 5 years. We talked a little bit about Class 10. We talked a little bit about 9. Here are the insurance ratings in North Carolina. There's not necessarily special designations for all the numbers. I basically just listed the information that is part of the highlights, if you will. Under the class system, a Class 1 is the highest or the best rating that you can have. Class 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all benefit you if you have commercial property, because with each one of those different classifications, you should get an insurance break on commercial property. Basically, at a Class 6, this is usually where the biggest break occurs for residential insurance. So you will see a difference if you have a Class 6 versus a Class 9 insurance rating where you live. Class 7 and 8, again, you will see a step difference in each one of those. 9S is unique to some degree to North Carolina. A 9S means that within the area where you live, the fire department can get to your house within 5 road miles. And they also meet all the criteria that I stated earlier. Okay? So to be a 9S, they have to pass the rating, and your residence or business or whatever has to be within 5 road miles of the fire station. North Carolina also, over the last few years, added the 9E, which is the extended district map, which means that area beyond the 5-mile limit, up to 6 miles from the fire station, you can be rated as a 9E. That, again, is somewhat unique to North Carolina. Once you get beyond that territory, if you don't live basically within 5 miles of a fire department and you're not in a 9E area, then you have no fire protection as far as the state is concerned. And there are areas in Union County that have Class 10 fire protection areas. Okay. So, any questions about this? Yes, sir.
So there was one district on that map, looks like Pig Maddox Road. How far is that from you, 6 miles or 5 miles? It's over,
It's in our 6 mile.
so it isn't a 6 mile. So there's no difference between, I mean, what's the difference? Because it looks like it's in 5 miles of Stack Road, fire department, but it's in 6 miles by
It's
the
in-
road.
Yeah, because we got to go up into Stack Road area to get back
Right.
into it. It shows us the lower section of Pig Maddox
Right.
and stuff in there.
So does that matter, or, I mean, would that be something,
On the insurance side, it really doesn't matter.
okay, but so it doesn't really matter anything other than it's just another mile by the, because as crow flies, it's close, but
Mhm.
just getting around to it.
And what we do, it's been, it's in the CAD for CCOM. It's Lanes Creek's district,
Mhm.
but it recommends Stacks Road
Right.
as the first.
That's why I was
first thing.
wondering. And I was wondering if it would be any benefit to, I mean, if you just had to redraw the line or something, but you already handling that. that's what
We've
I'm
done
saying.
that, it's just, like they said, it's a little it's, when you start redrawing the lines on the map,
Right.
it's a little lengthy process that nobody's ever,
Yeah.
for the small spot it is ever taken.
So the only way that something like that would be worth it, if it was like more than 6 miles and go to a 10.
And if there's no residence there.
Right. If it's just vacant
If it's
land.
vacant land, then it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Nice houses down there.
Yeah, but for
I think
insurance
there's,
purposes, it don't matter.
there's 6
5 or 6
houses.
houses, yeah.
Yeah, but I just want to make a stipulation, if it's a road that goes out to field, then
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you're 10 or not, but if there are houses, then that's where the insurance rate.
Do we have any other areas that are like that are maybe, I guess up in New Salem, there's some areas that are Y'all have some-
The only areas that we have is one's in between Beaver Lane and New Salem, and neither one of us can get to it. And then we've got that little northeast point of Union County that you have to go into Stanley or Anson to get back to. There's just no way.
Yeah.
And there's only a couple of houses there. And all but one of them been built since the rating was established. So,
There may be a few areas where it's worth it to look at class 10 and see if there's other scenarios that can come into play, but you have to look at an individual area concern, so they're kind of spotty around the county. As far as what actually makes up the rating is, once you move beyond the class 9S rating and you are moving toward what the state calls a better than 9 rating, there are different things that go into the calculation to determine what rating you wind up with. These are the things that are looked at: emergency communications, the fire department, and the water supply are all looked at. And then recently they have added the community risk reduction, which we'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But all these things together are the things that determines the actual rating. Communications, basically what the state does is they come in and they look at the method that fires, and well, this is a good point to make this statement. Whenever we're talking about the ISO rating, by and large, all they are concerned with is fire. They're not concerned with rescue, they are not concerned with medical calls, none of that. It's totally structure fires, and your ability to provide protection for structure fires is what they are looking at. But whenever they come in, they look at emergency reporting, which is how the public sends calls to the 911 center. They look at telecommunicators, the number of communicators that you have on duty versus the total number of calls that the center handles. And then also the dispatch circuits, basically your ability to talk and how the fire departments are able to receive the notification and process that information. All these things are evaluated by the state whenever they come in. Basically speaking, if you have a couple of departments that are getting the better than 9 rating at the same time, the state will take a lot of this information and they'll look at the rating for the communication center and they will take it and apply it to this department as well as the next department. Where that changes a little bit is the equipment that the individual fire department has on their end as far as receiving calls and things of that nature. But basically, communications is looked at. It's 10 points overall. I can tell you the last better than 9 rating in the county that I saw, our communication center was a 9 point something. 9.2. Okay. I know why you know right now, but 9.2, which is a good rating for a communication center.
Class 1.
It is class 1. You're right. Each one of those areas, the fire department rating, the communications rating, the water supply area, they all get sub-rated as class 1, class 2, class 3, all the way down to class 9. As far as rating criteria for the individual fire departments, they look at engine companies, they look at the equipment that's carried, they look at pump capacity, they look at ladder or service company equipment, which is support equipment on the fire scene. They look at reserve ladders or service companies, reserve pumpers. They'll look at deployment analysis, which is basically, and this is a shift from the old ISO system to the new ISO system, where they look at the method in which you dispatch. Whenever we were talking over on the 1710 and 1720 application, what the state does and ISO nationally does under deployment analysis is they come in and they look at how well you meet that criteria for 1710. So everything that they judge on in that particular area is based on 1710 requirements, because that's a higher standard than 1720. So they're looking for you to be able to have a certain number and type of apparatus responding to certain numbers of people. And if you don't have perfection in the way that you're doing it, all that really means is they grade you down a little bit. So that's kind of a shift from whereas years ago it was totally based on how far structures were from the fire station in road miles. They gave you 1.5 miles road miles in all directions from a fire station for an engine credit, and they gave you 2.5 miles in all directions for ladder and service credit. Because that's how far the horse could run. And to tell you how primitive that system was, they counted the number of fire hydrants you had in the total district, and then they counted how many fire hydrants that you could get to within 1.5 miles, and they did a percentage. And that's how you got your credit. It was kind of a rudimentary way to do it. It's a more sophisticated model that they're using right now. Company personnel, up to 15 points. Many times they will say 15 plus points, that it is a non-capped category. However, for most people, the 15 points is incredibly difficult to ever achieve under company personnel. So it's also an expensive one for most organizations. Under training, 9 points for that. Training has changed a little bit also. There are certain numbers of hours that the officers, that the drivers, that new drivers, all these type of things, certain classes that they're supposed to attend as far as number of hours, certain levels of proficiency that they are looking at, and also they are looking at training facilities, and not just that you have them, but that you actually use them. Everything now is based on use. Years ago, all you had to have was, you had to have the props and you had to have the facilities. You didn't have to use them. Now you have to have and use them. And then operational considerations, which are things like standard operating procedures that are known, methods that you operate, all those type of things are incorporated into the operational considerations. Overall, the fire department is worth 50 points. Water supply, 40 points of the total. The supply system is worth 30 points. The hydrant size, type, and the installation methods are worth 3 points maximum. And the hydrant inspection and conditions that are done is worth 7 points. Now, one comment about this, whenever you look at the total, and I'm not going to try to go into long detail on this because it can almost turn into algebra, but whenever you look at this 40 points and on the slide before it, this 50 points, they have something called divergence in the ISO rating. And what that means is, let's say you have a really strong fire department, but your water supply is not quite as good, then your score gets diminished by a certain percentage. If you have a really strong water system and your fire department is not quite as good, then your score gets diminished. So there is a calculation where they deduct a little bit of the credit that you achieved because you cannot use all the resources as well as you could in a perfect situation.
Curtis, how far away is that water supply before it helps?
It depends on what type of water supply you're talking about.
The hydrant.
If it's a hydrant, there's two ways to look at it. One is, do you have a fully hydranted area? And is there a hydrant within 1,000 foot of the residence? Okay. There's also other calculations. Let's say you have a fire district where they have 85% of the roads in that district that are covered by fire hydrants, then the entire rating is based on that entire area having water coverage. Well, and what I'm saying by that, there's not necessarily an absolute whenever you get to ISO, because also up here on water calculations, it doesn't say so up here, you can also haul water by tankers, and they will come out and they will do a water hauling evolution, and they will time and they will measure the amount of water that you're able to dump, how long it takes to dump, how long it takes to move, all those type of things, and they'll do a calculation as to how much water you can maintain, and you have to be able to sustain it for a certain amount of time.
Do you have any trouble with this in New Salem?
No. We've got, there's 124 hydrants in New Salem, and we've got, I've got a 4,000 gallon tanker and then 3 1,500 gallon tankers.
So your rating's not affected by that, bad?
Well,
You're gonna find out.
we're gonna find out July 27th, he'll be here to do this very thing.
So, yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is if, when the water coming from Norwood, it's going down to, it's already down 218, down 205, I mean, does that help if you get it in proximity? And close enough, it's gonna help you be able to move that water quicker, right, with your pumpers?
The more coverage you got, the better.
Yeah,
Depends on what your target hazards are to the
yeah.
fields.
Plus the more coverage that you have, it also can wind up benefiting you with fill points.
Yes.
So you may have a fill point closer to the individual areas that needs to be covered.
Don't they have to maintain a 250 gallon a minute flow for like 2 hours?
Minimum.
Minimum. That's the minimum.
But you can do it. There are actually districts.
So, I mean, I'm getting at, I guess you're not getting a zero on that, I mean, you're,
Oh, no.
oh, so it's not hardly any water, you're getting that.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
nobody.
nobody should ever.
What kind, do you know what your points are on this?
No, I won't until,
Well, you don't have a point right now?
No,
this is actually a new,
Oh, this is new.
Yeah, it's all new.
this is New Frontier
yeah,
for certain departments that have always had a 9S. Whenever you move to the better than 9, they are being evaluated on things they've never been evaluated on before. Like I said, the 9S is a very basic standard, but once you start going into the better than, then it's much more difficult to try to achieve the better.
You have, you don't have much water either, do you? A little bit.
Yes, I mean, but, no, right now, we're still classified as a 9S or 9E.
Right. So this would be important if you were gonna go up to a higher rate.
yes.
Yeah.
Or you can also have a split district, where the areas where you have hydrants close, you can have one of the better numbers, like say you have 7, but the areas where you do not have the total water coverage away from the hydrants, then you can still be a class 9 in that area. That's a split rate. Then you have community risk reduction. This is fire prevention code being adopted and enforced. Public fire safety education and fire investigation programs, all these type of things are also evaluated. This is new within the last 2.5, 3 years in the ISO rating system. And whenever these things are done, it's not just that you have a fire code adopted and that you're enforcing it, it's also the certifications that are held by the people that are conducting all these activities, as well as their continuing ed to make sure that they are meeting the criteria. It also reverts back, and there's staffing requirements on this also. That's evaluated for that 5.5 additional points that are added on. These points right here, whenever I was talking about the calculation, these points are added after the divergence is deducted. So in other words, if you have the strong fire or the strong water and that one is, for lack of a better term, out of balance, and they do that divergence, if it hurts you, this right here can give you part of those points back the way it usually works. About the best explanation for that.
Extra credit.
Well, I hate to call it extra credit. That's what they called it originally, but what the heck, we'll call it extra credit right now because it goes above 100 points on the scale. Automatic aid, this is where I said we would come back to it in a little bit more detail. For automatic aid to be counted, and this is very important because under the new rating, automatic aid is not looked at like it was in the past. It's easier to apply now than it used to be. An automatic aid department can be credited to the primary department as long as they can enter that fire district within 5 road miles. and that's enter it at the boundary. So for New Salem, if you have a department that can respond up and they're 4.95 miles away from your fire district, as long as they have an entry point and can cross into your fire district within 5 road miles, they can be credited. In order for that to occur, they have to operate under an established agreement. They also have to have a predetermined response plan on the initial alarm. So in other words, whenever the fire departments provide their response request to communications and it's logged into the CAD, we have to be dispatching that automatic aid fire department on the initial dispatch for that credit to be received. That's where I stated earlier, if it's a case where somebody gets on scene, calls, says, I need help, that's not automatic aid, that's mutual aid. And mutual aid does not count toward the ISO grading at all. Okay? So they have to be on the initial alarm, there has to be an agreement, they have to be within 5 road miles. They have to have radio interoperability, that's not a problem for us. They should train together. It's actually a requirement for that, for the departments that you're using for automatic aid. And the SOPs, standard operating procedures, or the SOGs, standard operating guidelines that's used by the departments, should be known by both departments. So they should be shared where people know what is expected whenever they respond. And then that's demonstrated also through their training. Any questions about the automatic aid requirement? If not, that is the presentation for the ISO as well as the NFPA 17.
Questions for Curtis or comments? Curtis, I'm going to ask a question. I don't know if it's directed at you.
Okay.
Maybe Kevin, maybe some of the fire chiefs or anybody in the room. It appears to me that from a lot of that information, there are tangibles and intangibles with regard to providing service or quality of service. And what I mean by that is, for instance, if Johnny and Don Getty was had to race 50 yards, I'm not sure who'd win, but one of them would be faster than the other.
I'd pay to see that.
So one's department might get more points, might be more qualified because their firemen are faster. But at the same time, they have to have a specific kind of truck. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but has that list of tangibles or these various type departments already been put together? Does that make sense?
I would say that information is available and can be pulled together, yes. Even whenever you look at certain areas of the fire study, they may reference this along those lines also.
Well, am I wrong in assuming that's where we're trying to get to, is determining what that minimum level is of those tangibles?
Yes, sir.
I think that's where we started out at the beginning. There is a level, a standard there already today, otherwise you wouldn't be deemed a fire department. So again, there is a very base level that every department has met with tangibles that was presented tonight.
Which is the base requirement, which is the 9S.
Right.
Anything better than a 9 has to do with extra equipment and so forth. And some of the new things in the new rating schedule that changed, talking about automatic aid departments. Used to, we could only count their truck, now we can count their people. Used to, they had a career versus volunteer. Now they have an on-duty versus on-call, which makes a big difference for us, because we don't have any career people, except for City of Monroe. So now, but we do have on-duty people, so we're getting full credit for the people on duty versus where we used to have to use 3 volunteers to make 1 career to meet that 12.
What is your rating at Henry Bridge?
6.
6. Who else has a 6?
We're 6'9".
You got 6.
We got 6 last night.
You're going for a 6? You got a 6. So you're going for 6 in New Salem? Feel good about it? Huh?
Yeah, we're going.
Straight 6.
It'll still be a split district because of the 9E.
Right, but feel good about getting it, right?
Yeah.
What would it take for you to get a 6?
Do the water hall.
Water hall,
Yeah.
So just like a
just go
Truck
through the process,
truck or more hydrants or what?
more hydrants, combination, more, just get the trucks around me, like, my tankers to, one side of me, I got large tankers, the other side, I got small tankers. And those stations are in the process of updating theirs to some larger tankers.
I don't think it should be our goal to bring anybody down, but should our goal be to bring everybody to a 6?
Yeah, I think that's what all the fire chiefs' goal
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and that's the goal, it's just, no matter of getting,
Equipment?
Well, it's got to be
and
equipment.
it's equipment, it's a lot of other,
And it's also not something that you pick up the phone and say, hey, can you come down here tomorrow?
Yeah.
Because we put in our letter request a little over a year ago.
Well, I think some of the concerns I've heard have been that, worried about going down. Nobody wants to go back to where they were. And it, for like staffing or whatever, we're talking about staffing, a concern would be that if staff were not funded, right? Staff that you currently have to get your 6. If you get,
Well, you got a couple organizations now that are on probation because
Right.
they're not meeting that minimum 4
right,
in an engine, so,
but we're getting them help,
yes, sir.
yeah. So that, right about that, don't wanna go back, but should everybody we should strive to help everybody do better, even if it takes a long time. Silence don't make for good TV, y'all.
Johnny says we need to, Jerry says we need to take a 5-minute break.
Yes.
Okay, we'll adjourn, recess until 15 after 8. That's about a 7-minute out there. Sorry, Todd.
We gotta find one, he's wide open. No, he's just, almost.
Extremely ignorant, I'm gonna ask a few questions just so, for my benefit. You guys have so much more experience, so just chime in and say, no, you're wrong on that, or straighten me out, or whatever, but in talking about those tangibles, are those, it's my understanding from Curtis and you guys nodding that the staffing levels and those minimum need, or minimum requirements have been established. Am I understanding that correctly? Let's just talk about staffing level. Those staffing levels have been a part of the fire study, are already out there, already have been determined?
They have been used, and there is I can provide you with a list of the current staffing, all the way interpreted into an FTE format, so that does exist. But all the original recommendations for staffing that was done by the Fire Commission, they used the 1720 model.
Yeah, what we did, and then I'll let you, Gaddy, talk about it, but basically in a nutshell, what we did was rather than trying to meet 1720 at Lanes Creek and meet it at Stack Road, we tried to meet it in that area. In other words, from 3 fire departments to meet their 6, or 2 fire departments, depending on the way they're situated. It was a drawn-out process, Chief. I'll let you talk about how you established all that.
Basically, we went back through the NFPAs and some of the other criteria that we could get our hands on. And we know that no one fire department can afford to have the people that we call for. So what we did is, like John Chief Bly said, we tried to arrange it such that if one department had a call, they could put the 2 departments closest to that call on automatic aid, and they could get 6 people. We debated whether or not to put 1 person in a fire station, and our consensus of opinion was that 1 person is not a safe thing at all. So everybody started out with 2. It doesn't necessarily mean that the station that has the 2 people, their call volume requires that they have 2 people, but it helps the people right around them. So it's a countywide thing. It's not an independent, it's not a station thing or a department thing. And since that was done, I noticed tonight that a couple of the departments have increased in their population, which is going to cause that to change. I mean, it's going to cause a minimum number of staffing.
And I think the other side of what we're seeing now more is the reliability problem.
Yeah.
So in other words, the way that system was built out was it took 2 or 3 departments to manage that. But what's happening now is those 2 or 3 around you are on calls. So you're not getting those people, or you're not getting all of those people, if that makes sense. So the reliability has become an issue in trying to build that system that way. Maybe not necessarily for Robert and Stack Road as much as for me and Stallings, or me and Bakers, you know.
Well, like so, I had a situation today. They had 1 pin in, and it ended up taking 6 departments, 5 departments, because they had calls in their area in addition to their pin in that they couldn't cover because their people were there. Plus, one of the mutual aid stations or automatic aid stations had calls in their district that somebody else had to come in. So it ended up that Wesley Chapel, myself, and Sandy Ridge was all running into those 2 districts while they were working on a pin in.
Was everything covered in that?
Everything was covered and it worked.
We always cover everything.
Right. Well, and that's what we're looking for.
That's never a question. It's about the reliability. When we talk about reliability, he hit on it just scratch the surface of reliability. Reliability is how many times are you on a call when you get another call?
Right. So now the staffing model that y'all came up with, is that dated or is it?
Yes, out there.
Is it outdated or is it dated? I didn't.
Outdated. I mean, so,
It was established in 2010?
but is it something simple to, I mean, is it simple, is
2010?
it something simple to go with the population
Yeah.
increase?
It
You know,
goes
just
on- it
increase
goes
the
on-
numbers by the increase? Is it something that's easy to change over time?
Yes.
Yeah, it goes on.
The basic concept is solid.
Responses and population.
You just saw the basic concept.
Right, but I mean, your way of finding out who you're gonna staff and your way of doing it where you're not just maybe putting them all at one station, but you're kind of spreading them out like you, one station may
And
have.
what throws a wrench into that is if a chief says, well, I don't want people in my department.
Have we had that?
Yes.
That was gonna be my question is, and it may sound stingy, but suppose that the base model says that you need, say in my department, I need 2 paid staff, but I don't want those 2 paid staff. You're indicating you have an apparatus in place that means they don't have to take it if they don't want them. You can work that out with
That
other
means they're
departments.
they're taking the other option, which is
Okay.
they're guaranteeing that turnout.
Yeah, so like, let's say that, this department in the middle, he's all volunteer, doesn't want any paid staff. This one, and this one may not be, so you would put the people there, but they still help him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where the call is in the county. If that department needs help, you'll get it.
And every department, including the city of Monroe in Union County, has automatic aid
Right.
agreements.
Well, that's one of the biggest things that we looked at when we came in this, and Jerry and I were talking about this the other day, is that you know, if you've already got the model and you feel comfortable with it, then probably that's probably one of the first things that we need to get into and approve. We could get that and move on. If y'all have already done the work and it's a sustainable model, if you feel it's sustainable, I mean, you guys know that better than any of us. Feel like that, what do y'all think about that? What, from the community? Y'all feel comfortable with that?
I think it sounds like a good start.
And we can knock that out in next meeting and vote on it. If y'all want to bring, maybe give us a hit that the first of the next meeting and vote on it next meeting. Anybody not liking the funding model that y'all did, or anybody had problems with it?
Funding or
I
staff?
mean, I'm not funding,
Yeah.
staffing model. Did anybody not like it?
Most people here probably don't even know what it is. She's looking at me like.
I mean,
I'm
sure you
studying
never
here,
seen it,
okay?
right?
I know,
what I
I've been
mean,
studying stuff.
was there a lot of chiefs that had problems with it?
I don't think so, but that would be something that it would probably need to go back before them. You know, before I'd be comfortable in recommending that, because we gotta find out who's in, who's out, you know, kind of thing.
I think the biggest thing, some of them, I know too, is just going through the change of the extra work and extra headache of keeping up with paying people and
Well,
stuff like
but
that.
you're saying they don't have to have them if they don't want them, though, right?
Right.
And they've been staffing their stations
With volunteers?
with volunteers and doing fine with it.
Well, let's don't mess up the part on that. I mean, but you know, if we have a plan that we can not mess up their situation, then nobody should really be opposed to it. And yet, how did y'all do it? Y'all approved it through the fire commission,
It went through the fire chiefs and then to the fire commission.
and it passed through that.
Yeah, and then it was presented to the commission, and it was designed to implement over a 4-year period or something like that.
Yeah,
There
that's
was-
why I would suggest going back to it. I
Yeah.
think that the chiefs and the commission, if you want to go that route, you need to let them update it, because it's been implemented over 3 years now, maybe.
Yes.
But like they said, not all chiefs took advantage of the positions, and some said no, thank you. So I think you have to get a current snapshot of where you are and update the model based on where you are, because it's been partially implemented over time. I think the price tag was like $1 million, $1.2 million originally, and it was divided up to go into a 4-year implementation. So we were in like the 3rd year of that this year, and then on top of that, some folks didn't take it, so you kind of have a partial implementation, which is where you're at now. So that old model probably doesn't work anymore. I think you have to get a new, kind of a fresh look at it.
Yeah, and we actually have a fire commission meeting scheduled for tomorrow night.
Okay, Jeff said fresh look. Would that be a fresh look by this committee or a fresh look by the fire commission and the fire chiefs?
My suggestion would be let the fire commission and the fire chiefs chew on it, and then let Johnny or whoever from that group bring that back to this committee for you to review and take a look at how you're gonna get from there to what you put in your contracts. Because I'm not so sure you're gonna staff up as fast. You're not gonna go 0 to 60, it may be another couple of years of implementation. That was the issue originally, was that it was way more than I think whatever I thought cost-wise could be implemented in a single year.
So are we already doing it?
We did, it was done partially, so when it was originally done, it was Neil and Matthew Delk. Neil Spear and Matthew Delk took the original staffing plan and divided it up over 4 years, and that was the guideline which we were using as we implemented staffing across the years. But now that's stale by 4 years.
Okay, but is everybody getting it? Because you're all I hear is you're implementing it over a 4-year period of time. Is everybody getting
Well,
it?
right now, we only have 4 departments that are not staffed.
Right. And some of those by choice, because they were given funding, they chose not to use the funding for staff.
They used it for something else.
Yes.
Or gave it back, or said nothing to give it.
And let me clarify that. We have all but 4 departments that are staffed, but not necessarily all departments are staffed to the recommendation of that document. Does that make sense?
So we need to, okay, for example, when the county manager and the finance officer sit down at the table with you and you need those positions because that's the model that we come up with and agree to, then that's what it needs to be, right?
No. I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you on that one, because I see us quickly changing from the 18 departments managing their departments to the county telling them what they're going to do.
Okay, when you go before the manager, and you ask her for something, you ask her to approve something, like Johnny says, well, she might not approve my positions. If your positions are in that staffing model, then she should have no reason to or to say you shouldn't have those positions,
Right.
correct?
Right, and to clarify that my understanding, so if I come in and ask for 10 positions, and
If
I'm
that's in the
not
staffing
recommending-
model, now, if you got 5 positions in the staffing model,
Right.
but you come and ask for 10, I wouldn't expect to get 10.
No, and that's why I was wanting to
Right.
clarify that.
So you guys are the ones that know how many people you need better than anybody in the room. So if you come out and say, I need 10 positions, and the manager feels like you only need 8 positions, but the staffing model says you need 10 positions, then the commissioners definitely should staff you with 10 positions.
And I would agree with Jeff that we probably need to go back and take a look, because now with the reliability issues that we're having, that's gonna change some of the areas a little bit. What the recommendation should be. For example, I know you're working on one and you're supposed to be at, by that staffing model, 2 or 4?
Well, I think it's,
Was 4.
4, yeah,
From
so,
what I remember.
That's it.
you know.
It was 2, and then they changed it because of the area.
Yeah, and the reliability at West of Chapel and Stallings and our place, we're supposed to be at 6, we're at 5. And, when we take a look at how often we're on 2 or 3 calls, it's,
Because that's the common complaint that I was hearing, was that, I need my positions, or I want, I need something, where did that come from?
where.
How do I know that you need those positions? Is it something on paper?
Yes,
And that's what we're,
yes,
yeah.
and those positions.
I'll agree with
that. Yeah,
I couldn't agree to one where you say, well, that's what it's going to be.
yeah.
That's where I was.
Well, the point is that, how do I know?
Right.
When I throw my hand up, and then Jerry throws his hand up, how do we know?
Yeah, and that was the process we worked through back
If
10
it's a
or
plan,
11.
if it's, I don't care, I mean, if all of y'all decided to go back all volunteer, that'd be fine with us, if y'all want to do that, but.
We'd love to.
Yeah.
We know that that's hard, and that's, but the biggest thing, and I think would be easy for y'all to see, to see that, if they had a plan of what they
So,
needed.
Mr. Chairman, are you asking us to present that plan at the next meeting?
I was fixing to ask you, not to ask you, but to ask you a question.
Okay.
Would, at our next meeting of this group, would it be premature to discuss that 4 year ago previous staffing model and how it was put together? for educational purposes, or would it be better to just leave that alone until you take that to the fire chiefs and get it updated?
Yeah, I think it may be better if we update it before that way we don't confuse the thing any worse.
Okay.
And,
Then,
we can do that by next month.
Let me ask a question now. We're talking about updating. You know, whatever we need to come out of here with needs to be a sustainable model. So like if that 2010 model wasn't sustainable until today, you see what I'm saying? Like
It is sustainable, but you have to make adjustments as the areas grow.
okay,
So those
so you
adjustments
relate
have
to
not been
population.
applied. Those adjustments have not been applied to that document.
So that needs to be included in there.
Yes.
So in 5 years from now,
We can do it again. You can
and it's just simple to do it. It's a
Yeah.
plan, it's a
Yeah.
plan.
It's just
That's what we're looking for, the
add
plan.
and subtract.
How do you do it?
Kevin can even do that.
But it's not just population. So, I mean, I think you have to take into consideration target hazards as well. So, your population may only increase by, 1 basis point, but if you have, a large, high-density development come in, then that changes the tactics from
The risk.
from the fire department stance. So in other words, if there's apartment condominiums that are being built, or major highways that are changing, then as that infrastructure builds out and as those communities build out, the population may not change you from from suburban to urban, but it will change the way that the fire department deals with those emergencies.
Should there be goals to include volunteers or try to recruit volunteers, younger people maybe? I mean, do y'all have volunteers at all? No, what I'm saying is that,
We already, I think most every department has some recruitment retention plan.
right.
And
But, so like in his situation where his staffing model and his need are just, he's right there at it, I mean, you can always say, I need, and this is why. And that's understandable. I mean, to come through that. But again, how do we know, that you're just not beefing up because you want to add people? But if you had volunteers, I mean, if you still have volunteers in your department, you're recruiting and you want to retain as many of those as you can. I
think one of the biggest things, to consider when you talk about volunteers, the hardest part of being a volunteer is that one of the things that I know a lot of talk about the fire study. A lot of basic level of training came out of the fire study. Union County, the fire chief sat down and we set goals of where we wanted to be for our basic level of training, which used to be a firefighter 1. Well, they don't have that anymore. Now it's a firefighter certification. And so to meet the basic level of service, you're over 300 hours of training just to be a firefighter. When you start talking to volunteers about coming on and joining up, and you're going to do 300 hours just to be certified to be on the fire department.
Do y'all not get any credit for being on the fire and not like training at the fire?
No.
There's no credit for.
No on-the-job training.
And so that's the
It seems like that'd
requirement.
be the best. I mean,
That's right.
I mean, for the younger kids.
So much dangerous.
Yeah, the problem is that.
What can we do to get them to, I mean, cause like, I'm learning, if I'm at the fire, no matter how many times I sit in the classroom, I'm learning when I'm there because I see something that is unexpected or different. How has anybody ever asked if that could be, fire time could be counted as training?
Curtis, you want to take that answer?
It has actually specifically been said out that it's not
It's not allowed.
But I mean, who did that?
It's a state.
State of Carolina as well as,
How long ago did that?
ISO, years ago.
Huh?
Years ago.
The reason they don't want you to do that is because of the danger to the person.
Oh, I got you. But I mean, that person's there anyways.
But there's a certain set of.
I mean, you're not gonna
classes.
tell them, you're not gonna tell them, but you're seeing, you're learning as you're doing, regardless of, I mean, because, somebody comes out with their hair on fire, you're gonna put their hair out, you're gonna learn not to spray with the hose, right? You're gonna find out something at each one, and that you'll have that training. That would be something I think we should try to get.
For the state, Mr. Chair,
Sure, go ahead.
for the state to recognize it as credible training, it has to be taught from an objective sheet, has to be delivered in a certain way, then they have to be tested to make sure that they absorb it. ergo classes, ergo instructors. So that's the only way the state gives you credit for training now. That's the Department of Insurance. Yeah, how long has it been that way, Curtis? 20?
Along.
So the hours have been that many hours for that long too?
No, the
No,
hours
sir.
haven't.
No, sir, the hours have continued to go up.
Do they go up every year?
No, I wouldn't say every year, but that program gets reevaluated every 5 years.
About every 5 years.
About every 5 years, the state Department of Insurance reevaluates that program.
I'm gonna. James Allen, yes, sir.
I'm gonna jump back just a little bit, but I wanna make sure I understand this, because I think we're talking about getting into looking at a basis for the personnel plan. I wanna understand how this is affected by the levels of service. I mean, is there different personnel needed for a 9 and a 6?
Different levels of service needed for a 9 or a 6.
From a personnel perspective, we're talking about looking at the personnel policy, that's what we're talking about.
When you're talking about insurance rates.
And I'm talking about insurance ratings.
Okay.
You know, before, Mr. Rushing, you mentioned maybe trying to get everybody to a 6. I'm trying to say, for a 9 and a 6, is there a difference? Or what makes that difference? Is that just equipment and other stuff, and the personnel could be the same? It's the number of people that show up on the call?
Right, it is related to, let me say this, and I think, Curtis, stop me if I get off track here. But for a 9, there's a 20-person requirement, and that's it. So 18 have to be, well, all 20 can be firefighters, but 2 have to be designated traffic. Anything better than a 9, it's based on your 20 previous responses and the number of personnel that you turned out for those 20 particular responses.
Fire
Okay.
responses.
And-
20 fire
yeah,
responses.
20 structural responses. let's just say. So yes, there is a difference for a 9 or a 6, because one is calculated as a whole and one is calculated based on data from runs.
Now, the 2010 staffing plan that y'all have in place, was there, I mean, I assume there's a target goal for
1720.
17,
As a group.
That was it,
Yeah.
it wasn't looking at an ISO rating or anything?
Yes, ISO ratings were looked at, and so ISO ratings should improve anybody who wants to do it, it'll help them. It still doesn't alleviate the 4 people and an engine company that he talked about that's a requirement.
I got you. I guess there's a base level you have to meet. I guess what I'm trying to find out is in that staffing model, are you trying to get better than that, than the base? You know, what's the goal for the county? Is it be better than the 1720 requirements, or is it to meet those across the county?
Well, it's pretty hard to just meet 1720.
Yeah.
Pretty stiff.
But I think that it was boiled down to, if my department could make it with my volunteers, then I didn't need the staffing plan. But there was a base level to say, okay, with your size and your number of calls and your rating, then you should have this many people if you were gonna go paid during the day. At the time, I may not have wanted to do that, some still don't. So then as you progress, so now it's 5 years later, the people that I used to rely on are either retired or they're gone to public work and they're not available anymore. Now I start looking at, well, what should I really have? I can probably get 2 more of my guys, so I hire 2. You know, then you get into, well, now these 2 guys that were volunteer are no longer available during the day. They're great during the night, but not during the day, so now I've got to, in order to meet my 9S, I have to have those 4 people plus the engine. So at a minimum, I've got to have that. So if I can do it with my volunteers and 1 paid, then me as a department chief, I'm going to do it with 1 paid, because I wanted to keep my costs down to the community that I serve. But then as I see things start deteriorating over time because of whatever reason, then I know that I need to augment that staff, at least to keep that 9S. That's the way that I look at it from managing my department.
And that's why some departments took it, and some departments didn't. Pete and them, for example, they got enough people that they didn't need it, or Sandy Ridge. You know, so they said, no, we were able to meet our 9S to minimum with our volunteers, so we don't need to pay people right now. And then as time goes on, eventually, you know, they get to the point where they can't meet it. They may never, you know, but if they get to that point, then it's there. And that staffing plan was for daytime only, 5 days a week, is the way it was set up. So basically, it covers while everybody's going to work at a public job. Did I answer your question?
I think so. I think y'all were saying that the staffing plan was to make everybody meet the minimum. It wasn't.
Right.
And that's what I was trying to say, was it trying to get more than that minimum? You're trying to beat that baseline.
I'm trying to attempt to be sequential with this, so let me respond to you, Johnny. It appears to me that we're moving in the direction of a contract. That was our original goal, right, or that's where we said we needed to start. I believe that, and anybody speak up and correct me if they think I'm going wrong here, I believe that that staffing model will certainly be a part of that contract. I also believe that the Fire Commission and the Fire Chiefs Association should weigh in and provide input on that staffing model before we even touch it. Curtis has indicated that he has sort of a bare bones or a direction that we can start looking at in terms of a contract that we may bring to our next meeting, which is 2 weeks, to discuss. And do you believe that the fire chiefs and the fire commission could take a look at the staffing model update, or whatever you want to call it, refer to it as, before the next meeting? Not the 2-week meeting, but the 4-week meeting?
Yeah, I believe we can do that in 4 weeks. Don's retired.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think we can do that. I think we could probably.
He sure does offer to let you do a lot, doesn't he?
He does. Because he's retired.
Okay. I'm trying to move us forward and gain consensus here in a direction, at least a direction.
I think that's a good planned step.
Okay.
Yeah, the staffing is gonna be a big part of the contract.
Okay. Can I ask you to initiate that, Johnny?
I will.
Okay.
I'll take care of that.
Along that line, certainly, when you start talking about contracts, and you start talking about attorneys getting involved, and Jeff Crook is our staff attorney, and he has put these frequently asked questions or questions and answers together, and it talks about general statutes as it relates to fire districts, fire fees, funding mechanisms, et cetera, et cetera. So we can look those over and discuss them a little bit here in about the next 12, 15 minutes.
This matter of environmental control is getting awfully hot. Is there a way the weather's air moving?
Jeff's a jack of all trades.
Thanks, sir. We're out for hours.
Far be it us to try to save money, right?
No paper towels, or bathroom.
Get a little stingy around here.
Water fountain doesn't work.
One question, I know the commissioners just passed a reporting incident program, the firehouse program to go with that. Should that be in the contract that all departments, they participate? Is that something to look at there? I know there's a considerable amount of money, and are all the departments, seeing the counties providing it, it's going to be mandatory that they participate in this program?
That would be the desire in the contract.
So that would
be the desire in the contract.
In the contract, that they participate? That makes sense.
Need to take this home.
Is this our homework?
You very well can be. I just want to give you a few minutes if you saw something that scared you or saw something you really wanted to add another question or find out in the interim. I try to do that before the next meeting.
And the next meeting, we're gonna cover, we have a sample contract, we think, is that the next one?
That is the desired goal, yes, is to move in that direction. As Stoney's indicated, that's quite a bit of information, for you to digest at once. So we'll let you take that and look through it for next time. We need to establish a tentative agenda for our next meeting, which will be June 22nd. And I believe, unless I heard you wrong, consensus is that we'll begin to look at that maybe model contract, or at least a bare bones contract, to begin moving in that direction while we wait on the Fire Commission and the Fire Chiefs Association to fine tune that staffing model. Any additional items you would like to add to that agenda for the next meeting? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to approve.
Motion to adjourn, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you for your time and your patience.
Next meeting date? All fire meetings are 7 o'clock, unless Johnny